Um, Excuse me, but I'm in charge of this investigation. But my words aren't even heard as Ava begins barking out orders to her team members. Her suggestions are to check out newcomers to town, search any unused locations around the borders, and interrogate, not interview, anybody who may have seen what happened. The group rise from their places like dogs eager to follow her command. Enough is enough. I step out from around my desk and plant my feet firmly on the floor. You cannot just barrel in here and crash about town in the hopes of finding a deranged murderer hiding out there somewhere. My voice is louder and more commanding than I expected, making even Douglas glance up from the front desk and tense. The tall, athletic leader turns slowly to face me, seeming once again more curious than angered. Following my lead is the only way we'll catch the killer. Hmm. Obviously not, seeing as you haven't caught him yet. I notice Farah grin in amusement behind Ava, but try to keep my focus trained on the leader. Ava's lips tighten only a fraction of an amount, but I know I've finally pressed her buttons as much as she's pushed mine. A heavy silence reigns over the office once again, and I'm thankful when Nat steps into the center of the room, like some kind of referee during a boxing match. We're a large group, she says, resting a hand on Ava's shoulders, though bringing her out of silent force. Certainly large enough to split our resources. She looks at me, smiling and giving a nod of encouragement. What do you suggest we do, Detective? The hostility in the team leader's posture settles, reminding me of a bird calming ruffled feathers, and she spins away from me. I let out a subtle, calming breath and lean back against my desk, thinking over my options. Hmm. Yeah, let's talk to Verda first. I would suggest talking to our pathologist, Verda, to see if he's found anything further after the full autopsy. I say, sitting back on my desk. Then I will go with you, that offers, and the rest can go with Ava, too. Farah steps forward between us. I think it was crash about town, she says, repeating my words from earlier and gaining a stern glare from Nat. I run a hand over my hair. That sounds like a good idea. We can all meet back here in a few hours. Both Nat and I turn to look at Ava, who remains silent for a moment before giving a stiff nod. Few hours then, she says, that is that. She strides out of my office, followed closely behind by Morgan and Farah, looking like some strange type of entourage. Well, that meeting probably could have gone better, I mutter quietly. I jump in surprise when it seems Nat heard what I mumbled. She chuckles softly, half smiling at me. It went better than most meetings Ava has. I return to smile all the intensity of the moments before draining away with Nat's much calmer presence. I'm sorry about Ava, she continues. We don't often work with others, and I don't think she's too worried about improving her social etiquette when we do. Hmm. It's not you who needs to be sorry for her actions. I do have to commend you, she begins. There are not many who don't cow down to her. Intimidating attitude? She grins. Yes, that's a good way of putting it. I just don't want your first impression of our team, your mother's team, to be based on Ava's poor social skills. She lets out a bright laugh. As the moment turns quiet, I suggest we head straight to the lab. Bird is in the basement, I say, pushing myself off my desk and heading to the door. The basement? It's where our pathology lab is, I explain, pausing in the doorway. Well, it's not much of a lab, to be honest, but Wayhaven's never had need of it before. And I hope it will never have need of it again after this, she replies, honestly lacing her every word. As she reaches the doorway, I glance at her to meet her eye. You seem a lot different to the others in your team. She gives a chuckle, a deep sound that reverberates from her chest and seems to vibrate through the air and land on my skin. I'm more like them than I would care to admit. Her voice wavers, and I frown as I'm sure I hear a tone of regret in her words. Down in the lab. As always, the chill air instantly hits me as we walk towards the doors of the lab. Nat seems to feel it even more than I do, shivering and rubbing her hands over her arms to try and warm up a little. I give a quick knock on the door before swinging it open and heading inside. We find Verda peering over a selection of papers spread over his desk, the victim hidden beneath the white sheet on the table behind him. He glances up, his focus instantly shifting to Nat, who is quite obviously shortening her steps to keep in stride with me and not steam on ahead with her long legs. Dr. Solomon Verda, this is Agent Natalie Sewell. I introduced him. Verda rises from his seat to walk towards us. Nat stretches out a hand in greeting, which Verda instantly takes. Nice to meet you, Dr. Verda. Likewise. Verder replies, a smile flickering at the corner of his mouth as he shoots me a knowing look. His raised brow is shouting, "This woman is very attractive." I pointedly ignore the look. Nat and her team work for my mother. We're working together on the investigation. Apparently, our killer has been busy killing lots of people in other places too.
And, Agent, maybe you can help me.
Verda says, reaching for the cloth covering the body. Nat is fine, she replies, her nose wrinkling as though the formality offends her. Verda nods with a smile, then lifts the cloth from the side of the victim to reveal her arms. I shuffle a step back at the sight of the jagged, long wounds sliced down the forearms of the dead woman.
Have wounds like this been inflicted on the other victims?
Nat's brows shift into a sympathetic frown. Unfortunately, yes. Is that how she died? I ask. Verda shakes his head.
No, she actually died of shock.
Of course she did. I roll my eyes, not looking forward to confirming Ava's assumption about cause of death. Her ego seems big enough. I notice Nat half smile at me, obviously realizing what I'm thinking. I glance down at the victim with a frown. So, how does someone die of shock?
There are many ways.
Verda replies, dragging his stool closer. Nat and I wince at the noise as the metal legs of the stool screech over the tiled floor. He takes a seat.
But if you want my opinion, it was due to an attempted blood transfusion.
What? Nat's voice is so sharp it makes me flinch. Her shoulders tense almost around her ears, and her jaw tightens so much I worry her teeth will chip.
A blood transfusion?
Verda repeats, seemingly unaffected by Nat's sudden change in demeanor. You think that's where the odd blood came from? I ask, remembering what Verda told me about the oddities within the victim's blood. Strange blood? Nat asks, her attention only tightening. I nod. Verda found something strange about the victim's blood, mainly that it didn't seem to be all hers. Some kind of parasitic mutation, right? It's a guess, Verda says with a shrug.
From what I could determine, it was as though the blood had been altered, confusing even the basic tests said it. It was hard to tell if it was a human or an animal. But the cells definitely seem human, just changed.
I frown, asking the question which seems to hang in the air. But why would they want to do that?
That's for you to answer, Detective. I can only give you the facts of what I find.
Verda says, covering the woman's arms with the sheet again.
Unfortunately, all the facts are not at my disposal until the hospital gets back to me.
When will that be? Nat asks, her shoulders relaxing a little. I glance at Verda.
A while.
Verda stands from his place and moves back to his desk.
The hospital doesn't exactly like the fact it has to help our department, so they can take a while. I heard they recently got a new blood technician, so I imagine things will take even longer.
Nat spreads her hands out. Don't they want to help you catch the killer? You would think so, wouldn't you? I scoff in reply, shaking my head slightly. The speed with which we catch the killer benefits them. Surely they can see that. Nat says more to herself than anything. And don't they want to help give her some peace? Her soft gaze flickers down to the dead woman. I'll wait to hear from you, I say to Verda as I shift around to leave. Nat stares at the victim for a moment longer before ripping her focus away to follow me out. I stare at the ground as we go, my mind wavering over the details I've learned so far. It's not much. You look troubled, Nat says suddenly, making me jump. Yeah, I was just thinking about the case. She looks ahead and nods. Understandable. It seems to be a difficult one. I pause mid-step and look at her. Last night I checked out a possible murder site, and while there I bumped into some rather unsavory characters. Nat splutters, coughing, and I can't help but notice she seems to be trying to cover an amused smile with her hand. I brush off the odd reaction, too confused by all of this to think on it further. Sorry, please continue. Hmm. Hmm. I think the strange blood needs to be looked at further over anything else. Even with these strangers, I don't want to get distracted. Are you certain this is something you should be investigating further? She asks. Better to focus on facts over oddities. But that's exactly the problem. I don't have any real facts to go on. Well, I think it's too cold down here to discuss anything anyway, she says, smiling wide. I nod and we continue on out of the basement to the station above. Isn't exactly going after oddities kind of the point of an investigation? Especially if you don't really have anything else to work with? You want to look at oddities like that because they're things that are unique. Those are things that might lead you somewhere. Anyway, back in the office. Back in my office, Nat is kind enough to make us some drinks while we wait for the rest of her team to return. Sorry about the lack of coffee, I say as she grasps a steaming mug of tea in front of herself instead. She gives a genuine smile, taking the seat opposite my desk. No worries, I prefer tea anyway. With my attempt at small talk over, our conversation returns to the case. Maybe it would be good to investigate the Ferris warehouse again. I say, voicing my thoughts aloud. I'm not exactly overly keen to return there after what happened before, but at least I could be more prepared this time. Nat leans forward in her chair, resting her forearms on her thighs. If you'd like, I can go with the rest of my team later. Hmm, good idea. I can go with you. She holds up a hand and gives an apologetic half smile. Actually, I was hoping we could go alone. I narrow my eyes at her a little, leaning back in my chair. I only want to acquaint myself with the area, she replies at my obvious suspicion, and have the chance to speak with my team about how best to work with others. I give her a signed sigh. All right. The niggles of anxiety that knot at my stomach settle somewhat. Might as well take advantage of having the extra people around for tasks like this. Are you certain you don't mind? She asks, concern in her tone, her dark brown eyes settling on mine. You did make your objection quite clear earlier about us going about town on our own. Yeah, it's fine. Working with a team wasn't exactly what I wanted for my first case, but seeing as we have to, hopefully she really will manage to talk some sense into her team. Then we can all get on with the case. At least you asked rather than demanded. I say, I only object to overbearing, egoistical. Oh, Ava, hello. My voice cracks and I almost spill my drink down my front in my haste to cut off my insults. Nat looks over her shoulder to the doorway where the rest of the team are entering. Any luck out and about? It yielded little, Ava replies, and I shift in my seat as her gaze flickers my way. Well, the detective and I have been speaking, and they suggested we check out one of the warehouses on the edge of town. Nat stands from her chair, moving closer to the group. They had an incident there with some possible suspects. Ava's gaze shoots to Nat so fast I'm surprised she doesn't topple over. And they agreed? Oh, that's Ava. And they agreed? I roll my eyes, sinking further into my chair and keeping my comments to myself, even more so when I see Farah grinning in the corner. Come on, Nat says, her tone light. We better get going before the sun sets. She glances back at me, giving an appreciative nod. See you tomorrow, Detective. It was good working with you today. She offers a smile along with the nod. Her expression, um, hmm. Yeah, see you tomorrow. I nod in return, sitting a little straighter in my chair. Ava gestures for the group to leave, all heading out of my office at the same time. I watch them leave the station. The exact moment they do, Tina pops her head around my door. What was that? She asks, her eyes shimmering. I shift a couple of papers on my desk. Nothing. She shuffles into the room, her curls bouncing around her face as she comes to perch herself on the edge of my desk beside me. Uh, I'm sorry, but 4 people who look like that in your office is not nothing. Hmm. They work for the government, so I think that would make them off limits. Probably worried about compromising their mission. I wouldn't mind compromising them. Tina, I reprimand, but can't help but chuckle. What? She asks, her expression one of faint innocence. She spreads her hands out wide in front of her as she slides down into the chair beside my desk. You can't blame me for thinking it. I mean, did you see them? Yes, I saw them, I reply, still chuckling. At least that's a start, I suppose, she says, pouting her lips. When was the last time you even thought about spending some time on your love life? Hmm. I have enough in my life right now. I'm not sure I can handle more. I suppose if that's how you really feel. She stands from her place, smiling so genuinely it makes her eyes crinkle. Just remember you're a detective now, Jules. You've reached pretty high in your career. You're allowed to enjoy the rest of your life too, you know? I purse my lips, then I tap a few keys on the computer so that the monitor flashes to life, unsure how to respond to Tina. You're a strong, independent person, she continues, and I flicker my gaze over the top of my screen to meet hers. You deserve a strong, independent person at your side. And I suppose that person should be you? Question mark. Another smile curves her lips. And it wouldn't hurt if they were easy on the eyes, right? I finally crack out a grin. All right, I get your point, but this murder takes priority right now. Oh, that reminds me, she says, pausing on her way out. I came in here to tell you I found out who the victim was. A heaviness hits me like a brick to my chest. Who was she? Janet Greenland, Tina says, her brows shifting into sympathy. Poor girl. She was an engineer, here looking for a place to rent, trying to get away from the crime of the big city. Kind of ironic, isn't it? She turns and leaves the somber air having fallen over my office at the news. I turn my focus back to my computer, hoping I might be able to figure out what to do next. Later that night, near the center of town. Hmm. What? You weren't a handsome man, were you, Dr. Murphy? The new Dr. Ethan Murphy says, glancing down at the photo ID badge now painted to. What? Glancing down at the photo ID badge now pinned to his jacket. Replacing the photo with his own would have to be done soon, but that could wait until tomorrow. Feeding had to be his focus. Oh, okay. I get it now. Murphy darts through the shadowed streets, frowning when the buzz of the lampposts makes his head ache. He does much better in moonlight only, so he heads towards one of the darker areas between the flat, boring buildings. There has to be someone around, even in this backwater hole of a town, he mutters. He scans the back doors of the apartment buildings. They line the walls like fridge doors down the aisle of a supermarket. The scent of humans inside seeps through the bricks, searing his nose, and he muffles his hungry groans with his hand. He hasn't fed in weeks, which was a mistake. His last failed experiment had to be due in part to his hunger. Eating straight from the source is not his preferred method of fulfilling his needs, but he has little choice due to being run out of his accommodation by that stupid pack of agents. Murphy's lip curls in disgust. Just the thought of them makes his skin itch. The agency is useless, a bunch of power-hungry humans and their supernatural pets. Murphy spits onto the street, the thought of them leaving a vile taste in his mouth, having to live in the shadows rather than taking their place at the top of this world, and all because of fear of the agency's wrath. It is beginning to wear thin on many of his kind. Killing the unit that had resided in Wayhaven had helped to dispel some of his pent-up rage. It had also been somewhat of a perk when he'd overheard them speaking about another potential victim in this town. Of course, they hadn't revealed anything further upon him asking. Torture isn't his forte, even if death is. Still, learning there is another potential vessel out there had given him hope once more, when he had feared his last attempt was the final one. Wayhaven isn't that big. He'll find this new one eventually, and once he has them, oh, crushing the agency will be like crushing ants beneath his boot. A smile tugs at his pale lips, his steps speeding with renewed intent. The time of the agency and their coddled supernaturals will be at an end soon enough, but for now, feeding has to be his priority. The fact is made obvious by the stinging of his dry throat and the pain which laces throughout his blood. It really has been too long since he's fed. Yet, even in a careful town like this one, lost lambs continue to stray from their flock. Murphy draws to a stop at the exit of an alleyway. Lamplight pools down onto the pavement below, highlighting a slim figure bundled up and marching so fast through the opposite alleyway they're almost sprinting. Probably afraid of what lurks in the shadows. Murphy chuckles at the thought. In a flash of movement, he steps out in front of the walker. The youthful face of the young boy stares back at him, wide-eyed. Where did you come? He stammers. Shh, Murphy coos, taking the boy's hand in both of his and staring into his eyes with unwavering intensity. Why don't you relax? For a few seconds, the boy struggles to yank his hand back, but the resistance finally melts. The boy's cornflower blue eyes mist over, and an absent-minded smile lands on his lips. Murphy grins wide, one arm sizing the boy's waist and yanking him closer, seizing. His free hand tips the youth's head to one side. The boy's satchel drops from his shoulder, collapsing onto the ground and spilling out a variety of colorful school textbooks. He didn't need to make quite that much of a mess of the boy, but then it's always fun to leave such a discovery for those persistently intrusive agents. Next chapter.